All right, so I made one small change to Breya, and that is I took out the steam vents and I put in um, Badlands. And the reason I did this was that, so I had Badlands in here earlier and I took it out for Coliseum, but I actually took out the wrong land to put Cephalid Coliseum in here. The reason is that Badlands just creates additional flexibility when it comes to your fetch lands. For example, Wooded Foothills previously had no way to go get black without Badlands in the deck. And it also means that because you have such a variety of fetch lands and the potential to either draw, you can draw 10 of them, plus you may draw even more given that the deck runs Crucible and Yawgmoth's Will. Um, you want a wider spread of targets when it comes to what you're using. So with this configuration, with the deck the way that it is, although I don't have the redundant volcanic island type land, what I do have is I have 8 lands that I can use for shackles, which I feel is pretty solid. I still have 3 lands for land tax, which I think is enough, and I have all of my fetches can get all of my colors, and I think that works out very, very well. So if you were to play a 32 land version of this, then I think yes, the 32nd land should be the steam vents, but as it stands now, we're at 31 and no other changes have occurred. So I just thought I'd run through a couple of quick games. I only played 3 today, but they were a lot of fun. First of all, I played. So I'm going to do this slightly out of order. I'll do the game against Break first because this game went very quickly. So I had my opponent's playing mono black, and I have a great hand against mono black. Like Mystical Tutor will hide cards from discard, Tithe recovers from it. Stoneforge is fantastic. I'm going first, and then I accidentally fetch right off the bat, which isn't a big deal if he wastelands me, but wasn't exactly what I intended to do. I'd prefer to have the flexibility to potentially Mystical Tutor right here. Unfortunately, that's what I did, so it was a slight mistake there. Anyway, I'm not punished for it, so I go ahead and just cast Stoneforge Mystic. And actually, I am punished for it. So the correct first turn was go get Tundra at the end of his turn, Mystical Tutor for Force of Will, then turn to Stoneforge. But I'm gonna have to do this a little painfully. So he plays Kiku Knight's Flower. Okay, so if I get to 4 mana, my guy's dead. So I'm going to Tithe Trick here, and for anyone who's seen my videos, you probably already know this technique, but if you haven't and you're not familiar with it, I'm holding the control button down so that I can activate an ability without passing priority. So I use Wooded Foothills, but so it goes on the stack. The cost is sacrificed, the effect is searched, the effect is on the stack, and before it resolves, I will respond to my own effect using control to cast Tithe, because at this moment in time, I have less lands than my opponent. So I Tithe. Now, normally with Wooded Foothills, I'd go get Volcanic, but I need to go get White in play. So I'm going to Tithe for Tundra Scrubland here, leaving the plateau specifically so that I can fetch it. Whereas normally I'd probably go get Volcanic. I'd still probably pick the same 2 lands on it, quite honestly. So anyway, end of turn, Stoneforge. That's why I needed the White into Sword. During my upkeep, I test the waters with the Mystical Tutor to see if I can get him to misplay. And he does nothing, so I get Force of Will, thinking, is he really going to let me draw this card? And he does. Now, I figured he'd respond to the Mystical by killing my guy, and I would go get like Mana Drain or something, but no, I get the Force of Will, so okay. Land, equip sword. Now this is why I should have Mysticaled for Force of Will early on. I saw what my hand was going to do, so I should have set myself up for this before he could potentially kill my guy. Luckily he misplays. So now he starts to play probably an Edict effect, realizes his error, and just concedes. And what was going to happen, of course, if he did try to play an Edict effect, he would get a Force of Will and a Teferi out of my hand. He would then go to 4 cards in hand from the spell he cast. Then he would get hit with the Stoneforge, drop to 3 in hand. My lands would all untap, and I would Mind Twist him for 3. And then on the follow-up, I would play my 5th land and Shackles and Steel Kiku, and I'm pretty sure I could manage to win from that position. So anyway, that was one game there. It was pretty quick and fun. The next one, I'm playing the Kung Fu Genius here, and I get to showcase a card that I added recently but didn't get to do a lot with, which was Notion Thief. My opponent's playing Kianos and Trio of Miletus, who draws extra cards for both of us. So Notion Thief should be particularly good against him. So right off the bat, seeing that commander in my head, I've already got it set that Notion Thief is the game plan here. So I lead off with a Watery Grave into Ponder. I pay life for Watery Grave because I don't want to subject City of Brass to a potential wasteland, and I'm not sure what colors I want to get with Catacombs and Strand. Plus, I might want to do something along the lines of getting a Scroll Rack, Brainstorm, or Jace. So I'm going to save my fetches till the end. So I set up the top of my deck with Mana Leak over Felwar Stone, and the last card was Ancient Tomb, but I have so much mana, even though Tomb would accelerate me, I think it made more sense to go this route and avoid potentially mana flooding. So my opponent plays a card that gives all his creatures the ability, turns all of his creatures into basically Bird of Paradise. So I drew Volcanic Island. Again, I'm going to hang on to fetches for as long as possible, and same with City of Brass. So go ahead and just play Thran Dynamo. He then plays Cogworker's Puzzle Knot, which gives him a 1/1, and for white mana, he's going to be able to create another one. And since these are all Birds of Paradise, I now have an incentive to kill this Cryptolith Right. So that's what I'm going to do here. So finally I play the Strand, and because I figure at this point I'm not going to worry too much about, I didn't draw a Brainstorm anytime here, and I will want the City of Brass in play eventually, and I might as well just take less damage to do it. So I go ahead and kill his Cryptolith Right. So he goes for Chromatic Lantern. This is going to undo the effect that I just pushed for, so I'm going to Mana Leak that. And he plays Azorius Chancery, and I'm wishing I still had my Vindicate. I draw Trinket Mage, however, and then make another stupid play. So the correct play here was Trinket into map, play the map, and strip mine his Azorius Chancery, but I don't. So I decided that since I kind of messed the turn up, I can do that next turn. I'll go ahead and play Breya, because I already hit a land on the table. So, oops. And he goes for Day of Judgment. So this is a little weird. I actually probably should have just let this happen, but I decided I'm going to remand and then potentially use the Trinket Mage play to Wasteland Azorius Chancery and generate a ton of tempo. And by the time the Day of Judgment resolves, I'll have done massive amounts of damage, and I can recast my commander and put him in a position where the commander feels like pressure for him, so he has to respond to it. And with him on the back foot, even though I'm low on cards, I should be doing all right. So I decide, with all that in mind, for tempo purposes only, I'm going to remand that back to his hand, unfortunately drawing Mana Crypt, which I don't need. And even more unfortunate, he binds a Boros Garrison, so now he's got 2 lands. I can only strip mine one of them, and so this means that he's going to be able to play the Day of Judgment next turn. And I draw yet another mana source. This is getting a bit out of hand. I could go for Sensei's Divining Top here, but I decide that giving him 6 mana is just way, way, way too much. So I'm going to go ahead and strip mine him, and then most likely his next turn would just be, Day of Judgment go kind of a thing. And since I'm expecting him to Day of Judgment, I go ahead and clear out his blocker and might as well get in some commander damage. So he plays a land, Dan. Sure enough, Day of Judgment. So I'm glad I made that decision. I draw yet another mana source. So I go ahead and play that in the commander, leaving the Crypt in my hand. I have enough mana to sacrifice Breya if he's got something like Treachery. He just has a tap land, and maybe, who knows, maybe he's holding a creature. And I draw another mana source. Really getting crazy now. So he plays Cogworker's Puzzle Knot. I am not going to sack to kill that servo. He can chump block if he wants to. If he waits to chump block forever, I will eventually clear the servo out on the turn when it's lethal. But otherwise, that's foolish. The only reason I did it the last time was because I knew he had Day of Judgment coming. So he just lets it all through. That's fine by me. I don't know what he's waiting for, but we'll see, I guess. So he plays his commander, which means he gets to draw a card, and I get to draw a card unless I play a land. Of course, I will never play a land. I will always take the card from this position, so that will never happen. And I could kill his guy before we get there. I could sacrifice both Thopters, for example, the Lantern and Felwar Stone, perhaps. But I don't think it's worth it. I actually have so much more mana than him that him drawing extra cards in a hand that's already cluttered up with 5 cards he probably can't use too well is less valuable for him than me drawing extra cards in a hand that's like nothing but gas, but no dressed up with nowhere to go here. So so the first card I draw is Colosseum, which is fantastic considering I have 2 cards I could actually throw away to that. pretty easily. So now I've got 3. So I figure what I'm going to do here is attack, and if he foolishly blocks Breya, then I will kill his commander using the flyers. So, but before I do that, I'm going to Colosseum so I can make the best choice possible. So I Colosseum myself, and I see Island, Delta, Talisman going to the graveyard, and I draw a Teachings and a Jace. So if you're watching carefully, I think you know what's coming. So Crypt. So I go Crypt, Jace, bounces Commander for tempo, swing with all but 1 Thopter. So I have exactly 8 mana left over. I was anticipating that he would just replay his commander, and then at the end of his turn, I would put his commander's ability on the stack, and then let him put it on the stack, and then I would Teachings for Notion Thief and slam Notion Thief, and then let his commander resolve, and I draw 2 cards to his 0. But watch what actually happens. He decides now's the time to stroke a genius for 5. Oh, so evil. So I Mystical Teachings and Notion Thief, because Mystical Teachings specifically says he gets a card with flash as well as an instant. And before I can even play it, he scoops it up. So something about him playing Stroke of Genius on me for 5 was a little bit unsettling for him. I can't imagine what there. So totally amazing. But what's really neat is, let's say he played his commander and I flashed in Notion Thief and drew 2 cards like I expected. Then during my upkeep, I could have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I could have flashback Mystical Teachings, Enlightened Tutored for Crucible, drawn and cast Crucible, and then immediately Cephalid Colosseum'd him for 3 to discard, make him discard 3, and then I would have drawn 3 more cards. So if you consider the 2 at the end of his turn from his commander and the 3 off of Colosseum, not counting Jace, that means I would have drawn 5 additional cards on my next turn anyway. So, gosh, how good is Notion Thief? So anyway, well, let's find out. Last game. And this one I'm not going to necessarily walk through, but so my opponent's playing as slowly, but my opponent's playing Phenax, which is a Millstone effect. So I go ahead and use my Imperial Seal early, crossing my fingers, hoping he can't mill me on turn 1, and I go get Crucible Worlds because I'm holding Tomb. He doesn't. So now I'm just hoping that if he mills me, he's going to Millstone me into the Strip Mine lock. So he tries for Trinket. I Brainstorm in response, and then crack a fetch, and which I replayed with Crucible, and go ahead and remand it back to his hand. So he's sitting on a Wayfarer's Bauble he can't use just now. I drew Demonic Tutor, so I DT for Soul Ring and play it and pass the turn. Now here's my expectation. I just got Soul Ring. So he casts Trinket Mage with exactly 1 mana untapped, and he's got a Wayfarer's Bauble that requires activation of 2. So money says that he's going to get Soul Ring here, and as a result, I'm not going to counter the Trinket Mage. I'm going to counter the Ring because I don't want to even give him a chance to top deck a Soul Ring later. So I let it happen, and sure enough, he goes and gets Soul Ring. So perfect. Always good to be able to play your opponent's hand there. It could have been worse. So like he could have gone, for example, and got Mana Crypt. If I, I mean, the risk is small, but if he went and got Mana Crypt and I attempted to counterspell it and he had Spell Snare, then it would have resolved, and he would have fetched with the Bauble, and then he would have been doing really well. Fortunately, my read was good, so during upkeep, and it wasn't that hard of a read, but still, it's always nice to again to play the opponent when you can. So during my upkeep, I go ahead and Vampiric Tutor. Now normally at this point I'm really low on cards, so actually what I would typically get here is a way to continue to draw cards. As good as Crucible is for generating free cards, it doesn't put them in my hand and doesn't find counterspells. But because I'm holding Factor Fiction, I can afford to go get Mind Twist here, so I do. And then considering there's always a chance he could draw something like Bojuka Bog, I go ahead and use my fetch this turn to get red and finish my colors off, and then I Mind Twist him for 4. And I get Animate Dead, Rexiel, and a couple of creatures that don't matter. They mostly just deal damage or interact with creatures, which of course is very low value against me. So he draws a land for the turn and then plays his commander. And now he's got a Trinket Mage who millstones for 2. So my turn before I drew Preordained. So before playing a land from the graveyard, I'm going to factor Fiction, hoping that I can find Strip Mine. Instead, I find Winter Orb Colosseum, which is nice because I have Crucible, Deluge, Necro, and Will. No matter where the Colosseum goes, it's effectively going to my hand. So really what he's splitting is a pile of Orb, Deluge, Necro, Will, and I'm going to get Cephalid Colosseum as a freebie. So he's got to take those 4 cards and divide them up how he sees fit. And wisely, he sticks Yawgmoth's Will by itself. But remember, it's effectively Yawgmoth's Will with Crucible. So this is really a 3-2 split, even though it looks like a 1-4 split. But this is the right call. Yawgmoth's Will is against a Millstone deck. It turns all his mill effects into brain geysers for me. So, of course, I'm going to take the Yawgmoth's Will and replay the Crucible. But first, let's preordain and make sure that that's the right call. So City Brass Coalition Relic. Since I have Will in my hand, I want to generate a ton of mana. I put Brass on the bottom, Relic on the top. I have just enough mana to play Crucible and cast the Relic and say go. So I do. He mills 2 cards off, hitting Muddle and Sword of Feast and Famine, which is a bit unfortunate. He drew a land, which is much more unfortunate as far as his turn is concerned, and then sacks his Bauble, I guess, just to deck thin, which is fine. So I use Charge Up Coalition Relic, draw a Mana Leak, which doesn't look too great right now. It doesn't look like it's going to do much. Replay. I was considering dropping the Will, but I decide. So the thing is, if I will now, I would very much like to cast Imperial Seal, and then brainstorm or ponder the card into my hand. Well, I don't have Preordain rather. And what I would have to do to make that happen is I'd have to Imperial Seal, Preordain. He would respond by using Trinket Mage, of course. Then I'd have to respond to that by Brainstorm. There's a lot of work, and there's an easier way to do this, and that the way is waiting a turn. So I go ahead and just, rather than willing now, I go ahead and just play Breya. Play my Marsh Flats again and pass. He mills off a Mystical Teachings and a Force of Will. Teachings fantastic here. You may see where this is going. Plays a Sphinx's Tutelage, which mills me whenever he draws a card, and it allows him to draw a card for 6 mana. It's a very, very bad Jam Day Tome. So at the end of his turn, I go ahead and fetch with Marsh Flats and flashback to Teachings for, you guessed it, I have Colosseum Crucible, and now I've got Notion Thief. I charge up my Relic, and down comes Notion Thief. So Trinket Mage is in play. I want to get Trinket Mage out of play, specifically because it can Millstone me, and I am planning to will at some point. So I go ahead and just sack the Thopters now. He mills a few more cards off the top, hitting Rift, which I would have actually made, which I was hoping to actually... I figured I'd have to tutor for it. Now it's right there in my graveyard, so he tutored it up for me, which is really cool. Hit him for some damage and pass. And in his draw phase, of course, I have a stop on my opponent's draw phase, not mine. So during his draw phase, I go ahead and use a fetch land because I don't want to accidentally draw all of my targets, which is low probability, but I might as well do that. Play correctly. So he draws a card, Tutelage happens, he mills off Teferi and Talisman of Progress, and during his draw step, I Colosseum him. So he tries to draw 3, he cannot, I draw 3. He discards his only card, so I have Time Walk, Ancestral Recalled him. And then he decides not to play his commander, so at the end of his turn, I Impulse. And foolishly pick Strip Mine. Now, I have Crucible, Notion Thief going. And Colosseum, I am never going to play Strip Mine. As good as Strip Mine Crucible is, it'd be a million years before I could get enough of his mana to matter. And I'm certainly not going to play it when I have a recurable Ancestral Recall / Time Walk / Mind Twist going on. Strip Mine Lock is nothing compared to that. I don't want to take Jitte here because Sword is already in my graveyard and Jitte is my only other equipment, and I'm holding Stoneforge. I can just tutor it. So the correct answer for me was certainly not Wooded Foothills, and that leaves Top. Top was the right card to choose. I chose the wrong card. It probably won't matter, though. But it does matter from the perspective of always trying to practice. Perfect practice makes perfect play. So anyway... main phase, I go ahead and just cast, I charged up my relics, I used the mana to cast Stoneforge Mystic and go get the Jitte. I go ahead and equip said Jitte, smack my opponent, cast Mana Vault, replay Cephalid Colosseum. I drew Forbid, which completes the square. It's a 4-card lock, but it is, I think, unbreakable outside of split-second cards, I suppose. And that lock is Colosseum, Notion Thief, Crucible, Forbid. The Colosseum gives you the cards for Forbid, prevents them from ever getting any cards, and Forbid allows you to use the cards that you got to prevent the card that they drew from mattering if it is an instant outside of cards with split second, of course. So anyway, end of my turn, he tries to draw a card off Sphinx's tutelage, and that's the other thing. There's no getting out of it. Even with permanent sources of card drawing, the only way you could get out of it would be a card like Dark Confidant or one of those effects that does not actually draw cards. So I draw a card. It doesn't even trigger his tutelage that says when he draws a card, I millstone 2, because he never actually drew the card. It's replaced. It's a replacement effect. It does still trigger off of his draw phase, though. He gets Duretti and Lantern. I will, of course, take his draw phase now. I hit a Terminus of mine, which I am certainly not going to use, and kill an island. So he goes to his end step. So I charge up Relic, and I think he's trying to puzzle out exactly how to get out of this. There is no way out of this. So go ahead and replay Cephalid Colosseum and cast Sharkmoth's Will. Hate to, spoil it, but yeah. Anyway, cast Sword of Feast and Famine, equip my commander with that, and with the last of my mana, tap all of my lands, well, other than the Coalition Relic, and cast Cyclonic Rift from the graveyard. So I am tapped out other than Relic. I hit him. He has exactly 3 cards in hand, thanks to the Rift. None of them are instants, of course. They're all permanents. He now has to discard a card, so he throws away tutelage, going to 2 cards in hand, which I then am able to recast a few more things. I cast Duretti and Teferi. I am now tapped out except for the Relic again, and I can untap Crucible, Underground, Soul Ring, Mana Vault. I tap the Mana Vault for Chromatic Lantern, the Soul Ring for Talisman, and I have exactly 5 mana up to keep the lock in place, although if I only had 4, I could use Deprive as a temporary measure. So he draws of course I have to discard for the turn. I throw away a bunch of fetch lands and stuff. So he draws, and during his draw step, Colosseum for 3. Notice I bounced 3 permanents back to his hand, took 1 away with Sword. He draws back up to 3, and Colosseum takes all 3 of those. So this combo turned the Rift into a triple Vindicate and a Time Walk and an Ancestral, which is pretty good. He's a bit, I think, at this point realizing that there is nothing he can do except play his commander. Of course, his commander has, for all intents and purposes, 0 use. It does nothing. He can't even draw a man land and play a man land to try to activate the man land and use his commander, because, well, besides the fact that I have a Jitte with a bunch of counters on it, he never gets to get a land through his draw phase. The only way he could use this commander would be if he drew a creature with Madness, of course. But then I reveal the rest of the story, which is Forbid with Buyback, holding 8 cards in my hand after forbidding with Buyback. And without further ado, thanks to the power of Jitte, I plus up my commander and smash him for a grand total of 28 points of commander damage, and my opponent is now dead. So very enjoyable, and it was very cool that in multiple games the Notion Thief, who really I didn't get to do any showcasing with after adding him to the deck, managed to play an important role in 2 of those games. Very, very cool. I love the fact that you can fetch him with Mystical Teachings, so you can effectively do something crazy if you have to. For example, you could transmute Muddle to go get Merchant Scroll, and Merchant Scroll for Mystical Teachings, and Mystical Teachings for Notion Thief over the course of probably a few turns if you were setting up the lock, which is really cool, meaning Muddle the Mixture can go get Notion Thief, and I think that's pretty nifty. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed it, and hopefully you think it's neat too, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Thanks for watching. See you next time.